Hey, what's up? What's up? Welcome back. This is episode number 4 of the You and Johnny Blue podcast. Today we're talking about attachment styles. And this is the way that people are sort of predisposed to engage and to interact and to seek to connect or either disconnect with their partner in intimate relationships. What's really cool about this is it's a pattern. And when you understand a pattern, it helps you to predict future occurrences. This is really cool in relationships because a lot of the times arguments and disagreements and misunderstandings seem random and they seem confusing and they seem hard to figure out. And it's really hard to understand what's going on at a deeper level. But what's so cool about these attachment styles is once you understand the basic framework and you start to see the pattern associated with each style, it really helps you to better understand yourself and the way you interact, your half of the relationship, or better understand your partner, better understand what they're going through, what they're working towards, and better understand how they're contributing to your engagement or disengagement in a relationship. So I'm really excited to talk about this stuff with you guys today. I have a short break in my work this evening before I go back in, so I thought I'd try to pound this out really quick. Like I said, this stuff is so cool, and I wish I would have learned about this like 10 years ago. I feel so passionately that everybody needs to really have a clear understanding of what their attachment style is and the attachment style of their partner if you're with somebody. If you're not with somebody, if you're dating or you're single, oh my gosh, I'm so happy that you're hopefully listening to this right now. If you're listening to this and you know somebody who's single, please send this to them, because knowing what your attachment style is and the attachment style of your preferred partner will help you to avoid so much trouble, so much heartache, and so many potential pitfalls that can so easily occur in dating and relationships. People say that opposites attract, and that is obviously true. Unfortunately, there's two attachment styles that really don't mesh very well, and these two are essentially opposites. And it's very common that these two attachment styles will end up with one another. And that's a real problem, because I want to talk to you about, there's only 3, okay? But I want to talk to you about how these two in particular can really butt heads because they're not going towards the same goal. We sort of assume that in relationships and in love, everybody's has an equal capacity for love or an equal desire to connect. But that's not really the case, unfortunately. And it is really unfortunate because, and this is hard, but you might be with somebody who has a different goal than you in your relationship. Maybe you're somebody who's really independent and who relies heavily on yourself, and you don't really need a lot from your partner. But maybe your partner is somebody who really desperately wants to connect and who wants to rely on you emotionally. I want to talk to you about how that's a very predictable pattern, and it's based off your attachment styles, and how it can be hard to hear this, but how you guys aren't really working towards the same goal. But until that's clearly understood and clearly articulated, it's kind of like you're both bashing your head against a wall. And this can happen quite frequently. There's good news, though. And the good news is that we can outline the problem. And that's the first step. You can't take any productive steps or any productive measures until you understand what's happening. Otherwise, you're just spinning your tires. And so having these conversations first is really important. But it is hard. It can be really hard to learn things about yourself that maybe you don't like, or to learn a hard truth about your partner and to sort of more clearly see what's happening there. When I first read this book, I cried because for the first time, there was somebody who was putting words to the way that I was feeling. And they say that's like the hallmark of any good song. You know, my friend John, he's had songs on the radio and like written #1 songs. And he tells me that your goal as a songwriter is to write a song that gives a voice to what people are feeling or thinking, but don't know. In other words, like you're highlighting something that people are thinking or feeling, but that they haven't even consciously recognized themselves. And when they hear it, it's like the light bulb goes on and they think, yes, yes, that's how I feel. That's what I think. That's what I want. That's what I like. And that's how this book was for me, because I had felt a certain way and I had felt like things were going on, and I was aware of them at a certain level, but not at a level where I could just clearly articulate and clearly state what it was, or what was happening, or how I was feeling. But I did recognize that there was a pattern, and at some level I understood sort of what was happening. But when somebody just said it and said, this is kind of common, and it's okay that you're feeling this way because here's the solution, it was like so life-changing for me, and it was life-giving for me, even though it didn't go the way I wanted it to at the time. And that's the other part that's hard about this. Is I've read a few books about it, and in one of the books it says that this doesn't always end with people staying together, because people have different goals in relationships and their attachment styles are driving them in different directions. Once you get a clear understanding of these things and you start seeing where you're wanting to go, and you start to realize that your partner has a different attachment style and that they're wanting to move in a different direction, and you guys are both realizing how much of your needs you'd have to compromise to stay together, some people are willing to do that, and other people recognize that the compromise is too much, because ultimately you're only as unhappy as your unmet needs. And compromise can be good up to a certain extent, but ultimately it's important for people to have what they want, and more importantly to have what they need. But without talking too much in circles around it, being vague about it, let's jump right into it. All right, we all have attachment systems in us. They're the things that drive us to connect with people. They're the things that drive us to go out on a date, to look for the right person for us, to seek to get into a relationship, to get engaged, to get married. They're the thing that seeks to text your partner, to call your girlfriend, the thing that produces or promotes the thought of, what's going on with that person? They seem a little different. I'm going to check in with them and ask if they're okay. All of these things are your attachment system, and they all drive you to connect. The thing is we don't all react the same to our attachment systems. The person who is a secure connector, the person who has a secure attachment style, they're really comfortable with their attachment system. They're comfortable with connecting. They're comfortable with intimacy. They're also comfortable with space. And they're comfortable with a healthy amount of distance from their partner as well. They're not insecure when their partner doesn't text them back. They don't feel anxious when they call and it goes straight to voicemail. They also don't feel the need to pull away when their partner expresses a desire to connect. When their partner makes a bid for intimacy, the secure attacher is fine with that. And in fact, they're happy with that. And the goal for all of us, every person in the world, is to be a secure attacher, to work more towards a secure attachment style. And the good news is that if we don't have that, that's okay, because we're learning now what our attachment style is. And they've done studies and found that attachment styles are plastic. You may not be able to shed your attachment style completely, but it can mold and change with time and intention. So that's great news. We'll talk more about some of the hallmarks of a secure attachment style in just a second, but there's two other ones. So there's only three. We've talked about the secure attachment style briefly. There's two other ones, and they're considered insecure attachment styles. They're totally different, but they're both based off of an insecure way of attaching. Now, there's infant attachment theory, which is the way an infant learns to attach to their parents. They found that this is partly correlated to your attachment style as an adult, but there's other factors too. Okay, so your attachment style is not an indictment on your parents. Don't call your parents after this and be like, Mom, Dad, you messed everything up. All right, it's due in part to your genetic makeup, and it's due in part to your past experiences, the relationships you've had with people. And what they found is actually both types of insecure attachers can become more secure if they are in a relationship with someone who's secure. So a secure attacher can centralize and normalize either side. These people are awesome. These people are superheroes. Like, you start learning about this, and suddenly, like, the dorky dad who, like, is an accountant or something, but, like, he's comfortable connecting with his wife and meeting his wife's needs emotionally, and he's supportive for his kids, and he encourages his kids to really be in touch with themselves and express their emotions. This guy's a fucking rock star, okay? That's awesome. And learning more about these things is so cool, to be able to recognize in people the awesome things that they're doing for their families and for their communities. Attachment styles aren't based on anything specific that they found. They're not related to gender. They're not related to race. They're just, like we said, related to a lot of different factors, and they can come up in everybody. A celebrity could be a secure attacher. They could also be an insecure attacher. It's hard to know until you really get to know the person. But let's jump into the insecure forms of attachment, because these are the most important. And we're going to start with the anxious attachment style, because one of the books I read called Attached, this book is freaking awesome. Like, if you are really interested in this and you want to learn more, I encourage you to read that book, Attached. It's like a magnet on the front that are in the form of like a heart. It's a really good book. You'll learn a lot more details. It's a little challenging to condense like multiple books into like a half an hour podcast, but I'm trying my best. The anxious attachment style is characterized by a few hallmark things, and we can start talking specifically in just a second. But generally speaking, this person is very sensitive to changes in connection or engagement with their partner. So they're very perceptive to emotional changes and changes in general in their intimate relationships. When they feel like their partner is maybe distancing themselves slightly, what happens is their attachment system becomes activated. In other words, the thing that drives them to connect, when they start to feel a disconnect, it starts really kicking in. Stereotypically, the anxious attacher is female. Now, we know it has nothing to do with race, but if you're just talking stereotypes, it's the girl who's her boyfriend's not answering, so she's calling him. He's not answering. Is he cheating on me? What's happening? Why isn't he responding to my calls? Texting, driving over to his house, etc. Okay? In that situation, her attachment system is being activated, and it's resulting in behaviors that are ultimately harmful to her relationship. But it's resulting in her desire to try to reestablish connection. And when she does that, her attachment system returns down to a normalized state. She's happy and she's secure. Guys have anxious attachment styles too. So we're not going to characterize by gender. But like we said, these people are very perceptive. That's a good thing. Being aware and perceiving changes in the people close to you is a great strength to have. But for people with an anxious attachment style, it can become problematic, because when there's limited data, it's easy for them to assign motives or jump to conclusions. And so they notice a change, and what they do is fill in the blanks to create a story, like we talked about in the second episode, and then they go acting off that story. Now, the thing is that may not be based in reality. Their partner might not be pulling away. In fact, maybe their partner had a long day at work and their partner's really tired. Maybe somebody calls their partner, it rings twice and goes to voicemail. They think, this guy just denied my call. An anxious attachment style is the type of person who notices things. They notice how many times did the phone ring before they hung up? Or did it go to voicemail on the normal amount of rings, or did they end the call more quickly? They keep score because they're very perceptive. They're wanting to know, hey, is my partner pulling away, or are they connected with me in the way that they normally are? And so if they call somebody and the person doesn't call back until the next day, they notice that. They notice how many times that they've texted somebody. Oh, I texted him 3 times and he only texted 1 text back. These are all the things that are going on in somebody who has an anxious attachment style's mind. Ultimately, with this person, they're very desperate, and I don't want to say desperate in a bad way, but they really place a high importance and a high drive and significance on engaging and connecting in an intimate way. They really want that. And that can be a really positive thing. Again, that's a good thing. But one of these books says that it's the anxious attacher who feels the most pain. This person is constantly experiencing disappointment or hurt, whether it's real or perceived. They're feeling a lot of feelings. And it's really important that the anxious attachment styles who are listening are hearing what I'm saying, because they're very often told, you're being needy, like you're asking for too much. You should be fine with what I'm giving you. Do you want me to call you how often? And what's happening is, because of a few different factors that hopefully we'll get to, they're feeling insecure or they're feeling anxious. And if they're not with somebody who's a secure attacher, somebody who can effectively and appropriately respond to their needs and meet their needs in a way that allows them to feel secure, if they're not with that type of person, and for instance, they're with somebody who's an avoidant attachment style, their needs can very often get belittled, disregarded, or ignored altogether. And we talked about you're only as unhappy as your unmet needs. These people can be unhappy because they do have a lot of needs. But if you have an anxious attachment style, I'm not an expert on this, but from what I've read, I want to tell you it's okay that you have those needs. You're not needy. Everybody has different needs, and it is okay that you want what you want. If you want to talk to somebody like on the phone 5 times a day, and that's what you need in a relationship to feel secure, that's okay. That is okay. And if you're with somebody who's belittling that, or who's telling you that that's too much or that that's unreasonable, I'm not going to tell you what to do, because every situation is different. But I just want you to know that your needs are yours, and you get to determine what you ask for and what you want, and ultimately where your boundaries lie in terms of what you need to feel happy and fulfilled with somebody. Okay, we're going to stop there for now with the anxious attachment style. We're going to hop over to the avoidant attachment style. Like I said, there's 3. There's secure, there's anxious, and there's avoidant. Now, you can be a mix of 2, and that's important to realize. It's a sliding scale. You can have certain traits of anxious and certain traits of secure, or certain traits of avoidant and some anxious. There's about 50% of the population is secure, 25% I think is avoidant, and 20% is anxious. There's about 4 or 5% that are a mix of anxious and avoidant. It's more uncommon, but those people are fairly conflicted, as you can probably see, why they're in some ways being driven to connect, but then in other ways being driven to run from that connection. And so there's an internal conflict there that's challenging. But the good news is that that's a very small percentage of people. People with avoidant attachment styles These people have the same drive and desire initially to connect and to engage in intimate relationships as anybody else. What happens with people with an avoidant attachment style, though, is as they start getting closer to intimacy, as the stakes start to ramp up, they start going through what's called a deactivating strategy. They start deactivating their attachment system. They start actively acting out behaviors to distance themselves from their partner. This is fairly predictable and pretty straightforward. They aren't very comfortable with connection, and they're not very comfortable with intimacy. What can happen is they'll often mistake self-reliance for independence. They're the type of person to rely heavily on themselves, to think to themselves, I don't want to rely on somebody else to meet my needs. I'm in charge of my own happiness. People with avoidant attachment styles are characterized by the stereotypical male, the person who shows interest initially in somebody, but then starts to say, you know what, I need my space. I need my independence. So I want to be able to spend time with my guy friends. I want to be able to X, Y, and Z. But the reason they feel that way is because they are trying to keep a certain distance from other people and a certain distance from emotional and intimate connections. Now, this can be men or it can be women. When we're talking about the dynamics between the anxious person and the avoidant person, it's usually the avoidant person who's belittling the needs of the person who's more anxious. I want to talk more about the avoidant attachment style in a little bit when we start finding solutions for each and advice for each in terms of how to best move forward in a productive way. But the hallmark trait of a secure attachment style is the ability to effectively communicate your wants and your needs. And this is why last week we covered awkward, quote unquote, awkward or uncomfortable conversations, because effectively communicating what you want and effectively communicating what you need can be very uncomfortable. It can be confrontational if it's something that you're not used to. But it's so important that we learn how to do that and feel comfortable doing that, because that's what neither of these insecure attachment styles are able to do. And it results in a lot of pathological and destructive patterns in relationships. When you can't effectively communicate your wants and your needs, what happens is that the anxious person starts engaging in what they call protest behavior. So for instance, the anxious person calls their boyfriend, or let's say the anxious person calls their girlfriend, and the girlfriend doesn't respond. And so then the person starts feeling anxious. They start keeping track of how long it takes until their girlfriend calls them back. And then when their girlfriend does call them back, you know what this person does? They're like, I'm not answering. I'm going to show them I'm not going to be the one who's putting myself out there. And so they don't answer the phone. And that's protest behavior, because instead of when the person calls them and they answer and say, hey, how's it going? Instead of effectively saying, I really like talking with you on the phone, and it kind of makes me feel a little bit insecure, or like you might not want to talk to me if every time I call it goes right to voicemail. That effective communication gives their partner a chance to either step up to the plate and engage in an adult conversation where this person now has a chance to effectively say, you know what, you're right, I'm sorry, it just happens a lot of time when I'm at work and my coworkers are around, and I don't want to seem unprofessional by taking personal calls, but I can definitely make more of an effort to step out a few times a day and try to see what you're up to when I have time. It gives them that option, or it gives them the option to belittle your needs, or to disregard it, or to fire back in a way that is their own form of protest behavior, which is, well, how do you expect me to do that when every day I come home and the house is messy, or X, Y, and Z? They can get defensive. They can get argumentative. And that's helpful to see, right? And when we're talking about effective communication always being the right choice. It's because it's instructive. No matter what, it's beneficial, because either your needs are met or you get to see how your partner responds to your wants and your needs. And that can be helpful to realize that this person is disregarding them, or they're belittling them, they're making fun of them, they're ignoring them, they're not stepping up to the plate. I'm stepping up and doing my part. I need to at least give them the opportunity to do theirs. But going through protest behavior, that's just a waste of time. And it's not allowing either party to step up and address the conflict or whatever issue is underneath the surface. Protest behavior happens a lot on both sides. It's in the form of yelling, accusing, being defensive, arguing. There's all kinds of different ways that it can manifest itself. But ultimately, neither side can step up and effectively communicate what they want and they need. The person who's feeling anxious can't say, hey, I know going out with your friends is really important and I want you to be able to do that, but I would really like to be able to spend some time here at home with just us. Instead, they may accuse, you always want to hang out with your friends. You never do what I want to do, etc., etc. The person who's avoidant has trouble doing that as well, because if the person who's avoidant is able to effectively communicate their wants and their needs, if their partner is calling them all the time at work, or their partner is wanting to go out just the two of them, instead of saying, you know what, I'm done talking about this, and leaving, which is deactivating strategy, right? Somebody getting up and saying, this conversation's over. I'm done talking about this, when clearly there hasn't been a resolution and the need hasn't been addressed. The emotional need being expressed hasn't been addressed. Standing up and walking away is a way to avoid ultimately dealing with the problem. And that is that person deactivating their attachment system. The attachment system is driving them to engage and connect and resolve, but standing up and leaving is turning that down. And the thing that's really interesting is that people with an avoidant attachment style will often do that because conflict resolution results in more intimacy. That's sort of the whole point of makeup sex, is that after a conflict, two people coming together to resolve it sort of naturally results in a deeper connection. And that deeper intimate connection often results in having sex. And so that's natural. But getting up and leaving consistently can be a deactivating strategy. In other words, that person is doing that. Now, they may not be aware of that, but they're doing that in a desire to maintain distance. And that might be hard to hear. Maybe that's you who's doing that, or maybe that's your partner. But it can't be addressed until we understand what's happening. And so having this conversation is really important. And I'm glad, if you're still here, that you're sticking in with it this long. If you're still here, I want to encourage you to read one of these books about it, because it's really going to help to give you a deeper understanding of what's going on there with you and with your partner. There's tons of examples. There's tons of really hands-on, usable data, usable information that you can begin to implement right away. But talking about that, let's start talking practically about what you can do if you have a more anxious attachment style in order to try to avoid some of the common pitfalls of somebody with that type of attachment style. One of the best things you can learn if you have an anxious attachment style is what's happening inside you. That anxious feeling that's going on is your attachment system being activated. And that's going to result, unless you're intentional and unless you're aware of what's happening, in you engaging in protest behavior. When you start feeling anxious, it's important to stop, to recognize what's going on, and take an inventory of what's happening. And to, like we talked about in the first episode of this podcast, just examine the story that you're telling yourself. Remember, you're a perceptive person, but the danger to that is that you can perceive things that aren't really there. And so you need to ask yourself, man, I'm feeling this distance between us, but what are some other possibilities? Is there a chance that he had a hard day at work, or that she got a call from her boss and had to hang up the phone right away? Or is there a reason this person's not texting me back? I don't really know. But instead of assigning those motives, and instead of assigning a story to this situation that makes me feel anxious, and instead of filling in the blanks with information that I don't know, and that's going to ultimately result in me engaging in behavior that's going to potentially push my partner away, I just want to take a second, and that's enough. They've done studies and they found, without getting, I don't have enough time to really get into it, but they found that when people with an anxious attachment style have a second or two to stop and process and internalize and like figure out what's happening internally, it helps them to more normally respond in a situation. So just take a second, understand what's happening there instead of jumping to conclusions and moving forward in an impulsive way. That's one thing you can do. If you're dating, I want to encourage you so strongly to be careful, okay? Be careful, because this is what's so interesting. In dating, the dating pool is more heavily saturated with avoidant attachment style people. Because think about it. The avoidant attachment style people start engaging in a relationship. Things are going really good. But what happens? They start getting closer and intimacy starts increasing. And when that starts happening, they start pulling away. And they start finding fault with people, which is a deactivating strategy. And then they start comparing this person to an ex-girlfriend or an ex-boyfriend. They call the phantom ex, this person that they've idealized in the past. And they say, this person doesn't compare to them. That's also a deactivating strategy. And as a result, they break up. And now they are recirculated back into the dating pool. People who have a secure attachment style, they maybe date one or two people, both serious relationships, but it doesn't take them very long to find somebody who they can comfortably settle down with. And then they're off the market. People with an anxious attachment style, they're not circulated into the dating pool as often because they don't want to get out of a relationship. And they'll often stay in whatever relationship they're in because they don't want to let go of whatever connection that they have there. So just be aware when you're meeting somebody that chances are that they're avoidant. Even though the avoidant attachment style is 25% of the population, in the dating pool, it is much higher. And this is something else to consider as well for people with an anxious attachment style. What will often happen is the butterflies that you feel in your stomach when you're talking with somebody, that's not love, that's not even infatuation, that's anxiety and stress that you feel when you're trying to connect with somebody who's an avoidant attachment style, right? Because they're not responding appropriately. You're reaching out to them and they're sending mixed signals. Sometimes it seems like they're interested, and when they do, that feels really good because you're getting that validation and that security, and you're feeling, oh yes, my attachment system is calmed down. This is awesome. But then they disappear for like 5 days. They don't call you back and they don't text you back. And then that anxiety starts building and it's like, what's going to happen? What's going on here? And the book says, these books say that you start to actually mistake that for attraction. That sense of angst is really what you're feeling when you're in that relationship. And that's not love. That's not healthy connection. And what they'll say is when you actually meet somebody with a secure attachment style, you text and they text you right back. You ask them, hey, I'm going to go with my friends. Like, would you want to come? And they say, yeah, that sounds fun. There's nothing to really worry about there. And as a result, it just kind of feels like platonic. It feels like there's no stress here. There's nothing really to be anxious about. I'm not wondering whether this person likes me or not. It's kind of obvious. And often people with an anxious attachment style who are unaware of what's happening will walk away from that person just thinking, oh man, the spark's just not there. So be careful of that, okay? Just be careful of that. The last piece of advice is, dude, just effectively communicate your wants and your needs. I know I'm making it sound easy, but you can do this. Step up to the plate and express what you want and express what you need. People with an avoidant attachment style let other people determine the pace in relationships. They kind of say, man, I want to talk to this person, but I'm going to wait till they text me. That way I'll know that they want to talk to me. If I text them and they text me back, I won't really know if they're wanting to talk to me or if they're just responding because I texted them. And so what often happens then is you won't end up texting somebody who you want to talk to for that reason. But this is why that's really problematic. This is super problematic because this is common dating advice, all right? This is for the anxious attachment style person. What's common dating advice? Play it cool. Don't text him. Wait for him to text you. Don't act too interested. It doesn't matter if you had a great time last night. Don't call him today. Don't text him today. Wait till tomorrow, because that's going to make you look strong. That's going to make you look independent. But you know what else that does? Guess what? If you're anxious and you're dating somebody with an avoidant attachment style and you have a great time with them, you guys, spend a good Saturday night together, and then you don't call them afterwards, and they don't have to meet any kind of emotional need from you, that's awesome for them. Like, they're getting the best of both worlds. They're getting to connect a little bit, but not too much, right? And so they think to themselves, this is awesome. While you're over here saying, like, you're kind of suffering. You're not getting really what you want. And so this person is thinking, this is a great fit for me. Like, I get to hang out with them, and I don't really have to talk to them on the phone. I don't have to meet really many of their emotional needs. There's very little effort for me when I don't want to give it. And the other thing is, guess what's going to happen at some point? At some point, you're going to say, if you're smart and you're a good communicator, you're going to say, hey, I like talking with you a little more, actually. Do you think we could stay in contact maybe a little bit more often? And then what's going to happen to the person who doesn't want that? Who wants to just keep a nice, healthy distance between you two? At some point, it's going to come to a head. And so why not have that happen right away? If you want to talk to somebody after your date, then you should do that right away. It's like flirting. It's like when you're flirting with somebody, people always try to say what they think the other person will think is funny. Like, what can I say that they will like? But that's just the worst way you could go about it. You should do the exact opposite, actually. When you're flirting with somebody, you should say something that you think is funny, right? Like within the first 2 minutes. Because if they laugh, then we share a sense of humor. If they don't laugh, then it's like, hey, listen, it's been nice talking with you, but we don't share a sense of humor, which is basically the most important part of any kind of just casual interaction. So I'm going to go flirt with somebody else. And that's the same thing if you're an anxious attachment style and you're going on a date with somebody. Don't let them set the pace. Be an active participant in determining how much connection you have with that person, because it's going to drive the wrong person away. And it's going to help you to know fairly early on who is right for you and who's going to ultimately be able to meet your needs so that you're going to be able to be as happy as you would like. All right, some advice for avoidant attachment style. We talked about not confusing self-reliance with independence. There's this really interesting thing called the dependency paradox. And what that is they found that in all kinds of things, in rats, in babies, in people, the more dependent somebody is on something, and the more that dependency is validated and the needs are met in that relationship, the more adventurous and courageous that person becomes. In other words, when they know they have a stable home base, it allows them to actually go out further into the world on their own. So if you're wanting to stimulate independence in your partner, and you're wanting to encourage, hey, get out there and kind of go hang out with your friends without me, the more dependent they are on you, the more willing they'll be to get out there and do that. And so if you're an avoidant attachment style, it is in your best interest, even selfishly, if that's, the way you want to look at it, it's in your best interest to meet the dependent needs of your partner. We're in this culture where we think that it's not okay to depend on your partner, that everything, all of your needs should just be met on your own. You're responsible for your own happiness. You're responsible for your own emotional well-being. It's not really my responsibility. Sorry, I can't really do that for you. Like, you need to soothe yourself. And there's this idea sort of that relying on somebody else emotionally is actually unhealthy. But even biologically speaking, that's not based on any data. The data scientifically states that even when they're looking at skin conductance tests in terms of how much people sweat in anxious situations, there's biological differences in the way people respond in these situations when they're holding their partner's hand. Like, for instance, they had these women, I know it's women, okay, let's just move past that. But anyway, they told these women that they're going to receive an electric shock randomly. And this is something that stimulates anxiety. And so they tested the skin conductance when they're holding a stranger's hand. And there was very little change. They did it when they're alone, etc. And they did it when they're holding their partner's hand. And basically what they found is when they're holding their partner's hand, they were significantly less anxious. There was almost no change in their skin conductance. They weren't sweating. Their heart rate stayed low. Their blood pressure stayed more even. There was physiological changes to their body happening at a biological and physiological level just because they were connected with their partner. And what they found is the more happily they were together, in other words, the more they were connected with their partner, the more significant the positive response. So they did even better. They were even less affected by this anxious event when they had a really stable connection with their partner. So if we're so physiologically linked to our partners, how can we not expect that emotionally? In other words, if physically we're so linked to our partners, how can we expect that emotionally we somehow shouldn't be? As if somehow we just shouldn't be at all reliant on them for anything. That's just not based on the way we are constructed. So let's just set that idea to the side and let's understand that it's okay to have a healthy amount of dependence on your partner. And especially if you're in an avoidant attachment style, understand that that's okay and that's even beneficial for you. To meet their dependent need will help them to be more independent. Another thing to consider and to be aware of is that there's something in you that starts shutting down when your partner starts getting close. There's something in you that starts pulling away, that starts deactivating your attachment drive when your partner starts getting close, when intimacy starts to rise. Be aware of that and recognize what it is that you're doing that's a result of that deactivating strategy. So, for instance, this sometimes looks like you go on a hike together and you have a really good conversation, but then you start walking a little bit farther out in front of your partner. That's your deactivating strategy. You're just putting a little bit of distance between you and them. These types of things can happen quite often, but you have to be aware first of when it's happening. All right, I know this podcast is going long, but there's a couple other things that I want to talk about. For an avoidant attachment style, there's what's called your phantom ex. And what happens is when you're with somebody, you're more likely to be focused on their faults as part of your deactivating strategy. In other words, when you start feeling attracted to them, this part in your brain starts to focus on the things that you don't like about them in order to keep a healthy distance between you two. And that's often what will cause avoidant people to break up, is that they just are aware of so many problems that they're kind of over it. But what happens is once the relationship is in the past and there's no threat of intimacy, because unfortunately that's just what it is, it's a threat to people with an avoidant attachment style. There's no threat of intimacy. They're actually able to take a much more healthy inventory of the relationship. Maybe they start realizing, whoa, this person actually was like pretty good. This person was like kind of amazing. And what happens then is they start comparing their future relationships, not future, but any new current relationship to their Phantom X. This standard becomes higher and higher to the point where no current partner can compare to their ex-partner. But using the Phantom X is a deactivating strategy. It's a distancing strategy. So listen, what you can do is you can start a gratitude list. Start writing down a list of things you're grateful for about your partner to help you focus on the positive things about them. Anxious attachment style people are great at this. Their activating strategy is focusing on the good things that they like about their partner to keep them connected. So adopting that as a strategy can help you counteract that desire to pull away. Another thing you can do, this is for both people, is find a damn secure partner. Because guess what? A secure partner is going to help to centralize both sides. If you're avoidant, try to avoid getting with an anxious partner. And it's the same the other way around, because you guys don't want the same thing. But a secure attacher can be comfortable with you having space. And when you start going through your protest behaviors, either side, let's say an anxious person is upset at their partner for X, Y, and Z, and instead of effectively communicating it, they start going through protest behaviors. They start lashing out. They start blaming randomly. A secure attacher will be able to say, hey, you seem really upset, and I know this probably isn't about me. I noticed, you have a lot of work piling up on your desk, and I know the end of the month is like, there's a lot of deadlines. So, what's going on? How are you feeling? Right? And they will recenter the conversation, and the anxious person will say, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to blame you. Like, that's not what this is all about. I'm just feeling overwhelmed because X, Y, and Z, right? And so the secure attacher doesn't take this blown up thing as a threat to them. They can see through it, and they're comfortable sitting in the problem and working through it with their partner. Whereas if the anxious person were to blow up and protest against an avoidant partner who also can't effectively communicate their wants and their needs, it's going to go through a pattern of destructive behaviors where people are lashing out, battling back and forth, not actually taking any steps forward actively in a positive way. All right, so we're going to end it there. There's probably a lot of things that I left out or didn't get a chance to touch on, but if you have any questions or things that you want to hear more about, please hit me up, let me know. And like I said, check out this one book, Attached. It's the best book that I've read on this subject. I think you'll really like it if you want to learn more about it. All right, thanks guys. Catch you on the flip side.